What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the PFN Scouting Podcast. Ian Cummings here with my fellow NFL draft analyst, A.J. Schulte. We got a good episode for you today, previewing some of the positions that we haven't covered quite as much so far this offseason, running back and linebacker ahead of the NFL Combine. Obviously, players get in February 25th. I believe linebackers will work out on the field on the 29th of February, and then the running backs will be March 2nd. So a lot to look forward to. So we won't be able to cover every single position before the Combine gets here. So we're trying to cover our bases with some position groups that aren't talked about quite as much. And I think for these two in particular, it's because people don't really know how to feel about them, right? You know, some people are thinking it's a little bit weaker class, but my opinion, and I think AJ's will be too, there are some gems in the rough to find. But first off, before we get into the scouting, the meat and the bones here, AJ, how you doing this week?
I'm doing great, man. Been a great week. Birthday's coming up, so I'm excited for that. We're doing a whole day thing. So
is it the big 25? Well, how
big 25?
There you go, man.
Yeah.
Hey, about time. I'm there right now. I'm waiting for 26 in August. So hey, congratulations. It's a good year. I know 24 is the Kobe year. I don't know if there's a number 25 to gravitate to. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, maybe. No, I'm kidding. It'll be the CEH year. There we go. Hey, he is a Super Bowl champ, but
there we
exactly.
go. There we go.
All right. Happy. What's the opposite of belated? Happy
early. We'll just go early.
Happy early birthday, my man. It's good to hear. And yeah, it's a good time. The birthday, the draft season. This is like the best time of year. So running backs and linebackers, you had an opportunity to scout some of those guys this past week. Before we get into like each position, we'll start with running backs in depth and then go to linebackers. We got 45-minute cutoff, so we like to talk a lot, so we'll try and be efficient with it. But just your general feel for both those positions. I know it's been a little bit polarizing so far, not in the sense that there's like guys at the very top of the board. It's kind of like we don't know who's going to come off the board first. We don't know how they're going to be valued. And we don't know how depth down the board is going to incentivize teams, whether just to wait and be patient or maybe, take a shot on guys that they're very confident about. How are you feeling about those two positions, just kind of broad scale?
Yeah, I think, like you were talking about, with especially the depth, it's because there's so many different kind of flavors of each at both running back and linebacker. You have your different styles, and so how each team, like schematically, will want to input different kind of linebackers. The depth in this class, I think, really stands out. Like there's no consensus first rounders, but if you talk to scouts, they're like, yeah, I'd take this guy. And like if round 3, yeah, don't worry about it. And so how do you spar now? Because like running backs and linebackers are sort of being devalued in a sense. How do you stack so many guys that you're like, yeah, I'd take him in the 3rd round, but obviously not all of these guys are going to go in the 3rd round. So I think it'll be very interesting to see how they all stack out, and we'll probably find out a little bit more after the Combine. But great class. Like I think both of them, even though there's no like real consensus one, I think you look at the overall talent. I think there's a lot of difference makers at both spots. A lot of guys that you can point to right away, and you're like, yeah, in a year or two, we're gonna go, oh, he should have gone a lot earlier. Tremendous athletes as well. There's some nuts athletes at linebacker this year. A lot of range, a lot of playmaking potential.
Yep, and that's honestly, it's great because I feel like these two positions in particular, I'm glad that we coupled these two together because I think these two, more than most, it's like are relatively dependent on what happens in front of them, right? Running backs, you need to have good offensive line, good blocking, right? Like to a degree, you can counteract that with good vision, creative instincts, right? Micro movements, efficient footwork. But at the end of the day, it's really good to have that in front of you. And then for linebackers too, having defensive tackles to encumber blocks, keep you clean, allow you to navigate through congestion, right? So to a degree, there is some degree of a symbiotic relationship there, but at the same time, good football players are good football players, guys who can elevate within those circumstances. So it's really fun to see how teams value that, not just, from a prospect valuation standpoint, but structurally too. And I think this class will be able to kind of put that under the microscope for sure. But let's get into running backs first. I know that's kind of been especially with the fantasy element too. A lot of people are paying attention to that, not just for draft purposes, but like, hey, who's going to win my championship next year? But NFL teams are looking at that too, right? You've had guys in previous years, Kyron Williams, for example, went day 3 and in the right situation ended up being a very, very good football player. But yeah, let's talk about the top guys first and work our way down. I know you've scouted some guys that you really like in the day 3 range over the past few days, but who's at the top of your board at the running back position? I know me personally, it was Travion Henderson for me. I know the injury concerns were kind of, an issue for him, but then he ended up returning to school. So it's a little bit of a void there. I have Trey Benson from Florida State personally. I got Bucky Irving up there too. Jonathan Brooks, if he can stay healthy, I really like his talent as well. There's a few others too. Audric Estime, I think it's overlooked as a volume back sometimes. I really like Isaiah Davis from South Dakota State too. A big fan of his. But who's at the top of your RB board?
Yeah, so I have Brooks just narrowly a couple spots ahead. Actually, I have Braylon Allen
Ooh,
right behind him.
Wisconsin. I like that.
I think we're underrating Allen's athleticism just a little bit, just because he dealt with a lot of
Mhm.
injuries this year. But I think when you look at his age and like how young he is and the kind of advanced processing that I saw out of his tape, a lot very good processing, setting up blocks, good patience, good feel overall, and then you add in his power. I think he can be like a starting running back in a committee pretty much right away. Now you do like, I don't know necessarily if he'll project to being like an every down, right? Like I want to see how he does at the combine, like, with like pass catching drills and things like that. But I think when you look at just a guy that's like a lead back in a committee, I think Braylon Allen can do that. Jonathan Brooks is as dynamic a playmaker as you'll
Mhm.
find. He's not quite like the elite crazy athlete of like Saquon and guys like that. But when you look at the play style that he plays with, it's almost reminiscent a little bit of Dalvin Cook. He's not quite as explosive, but the way that he can set up moves and is like a really good efficient
Yeah, that
slasher
was
as a running
exactly
back.
the
If you
word.
want to
I
get
was
into
gonna I was
archetype,
gonna follow up. Like, yeah, he's a slasher, right? But like he's so
yeah,
good at manipulating angles while still pressing forward, right? That
yeah,
flexibility that he has, it's phenomenal, and he uses it perfectly. So I just want to say that was the word that was in my head. So we got that synergy there. I love
yeah.
it.
Yeah, he's just uh, the way that he is can change directions and he doesn't
Yeah.
lose momentum when he does so. I think is outstanding. I love the Trey Benson shout out as well. Audric Estime is a fun bowling
Mhm.
ball. I mean, you just want him to go forward and just say good
Yep.
luck, right? Arm tacklers, you might as well just call in sick today because he's not going down. But another guy that I really like up at the top, you touched on Bucky Irving, but another guy in the Pac-12, Marshawn Lloyd
Yeah.
out of USC, I thought was at some points of this season, I was like, he might be the best player on this USC offense right now. Like he was just every time, like they didn't run the ball as often as I thought they should, because Marshawn Lloyd would get 9 yards a
Mhm.
carry in some of these games because everybody was focused on Caleb. They were like, okay, we're gonna take away the passing game, and Marshawn Lloyd would be like, all right, with light box, 12 yards. Just it's such an explosive
Yeah.
mover. Every time I watched him, I was like, this guy is. I think he's probably not going to be a lead back, but would you want a nice change of pace, explosive guy? Marshawn Lloyd is there, and Bucky Irving is like, he's small, but man,
Mhm.
what a
I know.
playmaker! I mean, you just want him out in space, get him on the move, whether you want him to catch the pass or kind of do some little toss plays, get him out on the outside of the perimeter. But like, good luck catching
Mhm.
him, like, cause he's so shifty, so dynamic. I love his play style is
Yeah.
tremendous. That's a good shout out because Bucky Irving probably a little small, so teams will dink him, but a tremendous playmaker.
Marshawn Lloyd is one. I was looking up the Senior Bowl measurements to see because I remember his measurements were pretty. I think it was 5'9" and then 217. So the dude is dense. So you
Yeah,
don't expect him to move the way he does. Like you said, really explosive, but like effortless explosive. Like he gains space and separation from tackling angles very easily. And then he's really shifty laterally too. I mean, the change of direction, the evasiveness for his size, right? Every time I do a mock draft, he falls a little bit, right? Because it's such a dense class in that day 2 range that sometimes guys get filtered out positional value. But every time I get to him at a certain point, it's like, wait, he's still on the board. And then I go down the checklist, like there aren't many reasons
Yeah.
for him to fall. I know he has a slight medical history, so that may be a factor at the NFL Combine, but he's just a really complete runner for his, build. And then at the Senior Bowl too, I think he showed really well in receiving drills as well, making some catches beyond his frame, running good routes. So really
Yeah.
complete back, and I think you're going to see that a lot in this class. It's a common theme. Guys who maybe aren't that elite level prospect, like we were spoiled last year with Bijan Robinson and Jameer Gibbs. Like that, we'll just call it like it is. Like we were spoiled. You're not going to see that very
Yeah.
often, but that doesn't mean there isn't talent this year, right? We don't want to use that juxtaposition to kind of flush out guys who do deserve some recognition. So I think a really good, fun
Yeah.
group at the top here, and Bucky Irving as well. I love the energy he plays with, not just athletically, but mentally, right? Like this is a dude who
Yeah.
plays beyond his frame. I love the contact balance for his size. His legs are always churning, and it's just that really, really urgent stride frequency that keeps him on his feet and allows him to keep stacking cuts, and keep, engaging in contact. And he's a good receiving threat too. So a lot of fun players, a lot of fun players. Any other guys that we
Yeah.
haven't mentioned that you want to get out there in this kind of middle rounds here before we move on to the next one?
Yeah. I think you talked about guys who aren't like an elite, but like a master of none, but like a jack of all
Yeah.
trades. Tennessee's Jalen
Yes.
Wright, I think he fits that mold perfectly. Like he's not a super dynamic athlete. He's not the best route runner in this class, but like find me something that he can't do at least a good level. I think you'd be out of luck because he handles everything well. I think he's got good vision as a runner. I love the way that he just attacks. He's constantly falling forward. Um, just just maybe not the most dynamic guy ever, but you're gonna look back in 3 years and go, huh, he probably shouldn't have fallen that far because he just ripped off 800 yards for me this season. All right, cool, nice steal. Good on us. Like we as a front office feel great for getting this guy in like the fourth round. I think Dane Brugler put him like 90 in his top 100
Mhm.
today that came out, but like I, he probably doesn't go top 100 could just because I don't know if he's necessarily the dynamic athlete that some of these other guys are. But you're going to look back at him in the fourth round and go, why did he fall that far? Just such a natural, patient runner that teams kind of the the smarter runners tend to fall because they don't run as fast. But teams typically go, oh, well, we regretted that, and I think he'd fit that
Yeah,
perfectly.
and I think he will run a little bit faster. I think, when he has a lane, a crease, that's when you really see that long speed. That's when he can activate it, right? I think there are times when, he's so patient. Sometimes he lulls you to sleep a little bit in the congested areas. And it's like, well, maybe he doesn't have the burst, but then, oh, he's got a lane. Oh, all of a sudden he's upfield and he's breaking away, right? So I think at one point, I can't remember the exact miles per hour figure, but I remember it was 21 or 22 when he had open field. So I think straight line mover in the 40-yard dash, we know people gravitate to that. I wouldn't be surprised if he
Yeah.
runs faster than we expect. And at that point, too,
Yeah.
for his size, 5'11, 210, what? So not a bowling ball, but you can see, like as you said, he always finishes forward. He's kind of got that grading contact balance and strength through arm tackles and things like that. So just a really complete player, like you said. I think he's a competent
Yeah.
pass blocker too, so that'll help him on third downs. So yeah, I mean, a really good middle round guy. I want to give a little bit bigger shout out to Isaiah Davis from South Dakota State because I'm a big fan of what he has to offer. I think, kind of
Yeah.
in that similar mold that we were just talking about, where not an elite physical talent, the explosiveness is definitely not elite. He might run in the 4.6s too, not a good long speed guy. But for running backs, to me personally, that's more of a bonus, right? Like if you have it, great. If you don't have it, I'm a little more concerned about the quickness in the short areas, right? The ability to gain quick misalignments with defenders in the first and second levels. And I think he has enough burst to work with there. But with Isaiah Davis, for me, I mean, 6 foot, 220, right? So this dude is that bowling ball guy. We got a few bowling balls in
Yeah.
this class: Braylon Allen, Audric Estime. Isaiah Davis is there. He's got that contact balance,
Yeah.
he's got that forward pressing physicality. But I think out of those guys, like Braylon Allen is very efficient as a processor. I think he's really good at working upfield and not wasting too much motion. I think Isaiah Davis does have a little bit of more wasted motion, but I think when he needs to create, when he needs to use micro movements to realign himself and kind of create optimal leverage and set up his blocks and play like that, I think he's a very good creator for his 220-pound mold
Yeah.
as well. I think he's a pretty good receiving threat too. He didn't really get used with volume at South Dakota State, but at the Senior Bowl, we saw those flashes. And anytime he had receiving reps at SDSU, I think he showed really good coordination. He can run routes out of the backfield. So I think there's still some untapped potential there, something we haven't seen. So I'm really excited to see
Yeah.
what he can do. But I mean, the bottom line is, man, we could go down the line. You don't have a bona fide first round prospect in this class, but I think you do have a lot of very competent guys in the middle and later rounds who, in the right situation, could flourish.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Isaiah Davis, if I think if you put him in a gap
Yeah.
scheme and just let him go, I think he's a guy that can, maybe not like you said, not gonna create the big chunk
Mhm.
plays, but short yardage, perfect guy. I would hesitate in like an outside like the Shanahan
Yeah,
stuff
he
if you
doesn't
want to
have the
be
speed to just
yeah,
activate those
yeah.
wide zone lanes. Yeah.
And I would just kind of like beating linebackers to the outside and kind of getting around. I don't know if that's necessarily his strength, but that I like you said, I don't think that diminishes his ability as a runner just because he's so good in the short areas. And I think if you could just get him behind pullers, tell him to go follow his guys and create an open space, I think Isaiah Davis is going to be a lot more productive than people
Yeah,
think.
I think about, in the modern NFL, kind of what we brought up earlier. Like, you need a rotation. It's not just a one back league anymore. You need guys who can provide value in the passing game. You need guys who can pass block on third downs if you want them to, like be reliable, right? That's becoming a prerequisite for coaches almost to trust them in that phase. But you also need guys who have the size, the physicality, and the vision to work efficiently on those early downs and keep the chains moving when you do have a lead, right? It's all about game scripts and playing with that game script. And Isaiah Davis stands out to me, a guy that I would circle, right? If I have a lead, I'm sending him out there and just letting him churn the chains, just letting him do that. So
Yeah.
I love those kinds of molds, especially in the middle rounds. There's always going to be a place for it. Let's move on to the later rounds now. Who are some sleepers that you like? I've got a few that I want to bring up, but you had the opportunity to scout a few guys. I know, especially in the later rounds. Like we talked about the middle rounds, a lot of volume in that range, but I think there are some very enticing sleepers. And one that you tweeted about, I believe, a guy who, I can't remember. I'll let you talk about the comp and everything, but Dijon Edwards, I know from
Yeah.
Georgia, was one guy that you really
Yeah.
liked. And any others that you want to bring up, feel free. But
Yeah.
what about Edwards?
Yeah. So Edwards, I said his comp was Giovanni
That's
Bernard.
what it was. I like that.
Um, just like not the most dynamic guy ever, right? Like average top end speed. I didn't think he had great burst to win on the outside, but tremendous, arguably like the best vision in the class. I think was so good, had such a natural feel as a runner, press the line, has the lateral agility to cut and change lanes, and he was set up defenders and then he'd cut outside and leave them just stuck in the trash. I mean, just gorgeous ability. I think in the open field, he's got great feel in space. Add on his ability as a pass catcher and a pass protector, and then the special teams experience. I think you have a guy that does it all. He's not big. He came in about like a little over 200
Mhm.
pounds. Like you could maybe tack on a few, but at this stage of his career, I don't know if you can necessarily add on too much. I think he's a little bit close to maxed
Mhm.
out, and he's not the best in terms of like contact balance, just out of that sheer size. But he does run hard. He'll run through an arm tackler if you don't square him up. But he's not necessarily going to break tackles. He's going to make more guys miss than anything. But you add on all of that experience. I think teams, as weird as it sounds, I think some teams will like that he stayed at Georgia behind all of those NFL backs and sat and waited for his turn. Because he was there behind Zamir White and James Cook
Mhm.
and Kenny McIntosh, like all these years. And he didn't get a shot until this season. And he handled it upon. You could tell he wasn't sitting on his hands just waiting. Like he was constantly working on his craft, and it shows in his film. Um, not a super big athlete that'll be, like, oh, this guy is like the one of the top 10 in the league. But you're gonna look back and go, man, he had a very, very productive season. He was quietly one of the better runners in the league. And that's why I was like, it's Giovanni
Mhm.
Bernard. Like, Bernard was always like such a nice pass catching duo. Everywhere he went was a tremendous number two that just always kept churning out good positive runs. And that's Dyson Edwards to me. I thought he was awesome. Another sleeper, Jaden Sheridan out of
Yes.
Monmouth. It's just so
Mhm.
explosive. I mean, holy smokes, he's constantly creating big plays. When you play at smaller universities, you want to be a standout from the rest of the guys, and I mean, you immediately knew when he was on the field because he would get the ball and then suddenly he'd be 20 yards the other way. Just and every all the defenders would go, "Where's he at? Where'd he go?" And he's behind him. He's running for a touchdown. And, like he just has that like instant
Mhm.
teleportation ability that's so fast. Such an explosive playmaker. Isaac Guerrero out of
Yes,
Louisville
yes.
is another guy that is just. I think he's probably going to be like that Shanahan running back that the 49ers take in like the fourth round. And you're like, all right, he did it again. Like, here's another one. We have no idea how to project him, but he was good in college. So maybe it'll work out this time. I think his nice cutting ability, good patience on the outside, special teams experience. Like, there are so many guys that are going to be such valuable parts of the committee.
Mhm.
I think it just in terms of different skill sets, like we talked about later on
Yeah,
or earlier. And then Kamani
from
Vidal
Troy.
out of
Yeah, I
Troy, I
like him.
think is my last is like my last day three sleeper. Maybe not a sleeper much, just because he was so productive at
Mhm.
Troy and he has a Senior Bowl. But you want a guy that's just going to come in the sixth round and be a little bit Isaiah Pacheco like, just such a hard physical
Yeah.
runner. Man, I love watching him play. Just a ball of energy. Like you talked about the bowling ball archetype. I think he fits that. Um, a little bit more dynamic than I thought he would be, but just like you just tell him to go forward and say good luck defense because he's going to run through you, he's going to run over you, he's going to run around you. I think he's such a like the tenacity that he runs with. It stands out every time I watch him.
Yeah, it's gonna be so fun to get a feel for the valuation in this class because in other classes, usually you have at least one or two guys that you can reasonably project. Maybe they'll go round one. And so some of these committee guys will go round three, round four. Now it's like round two, round three is kind of the top end of it. So how far do these committee guys fall? Can you get a Dijon Edwards in round five or round six or even round seven, right? Maybe Jalen Shurden, so I'm really curious to see what kind of value deals teams get. I love that you brought up Isaac Guerendo because I think he transferred over from Wisconsin, right? He was in that rotation and then he transferred over to Louisville. And Louisville has another very good back, Jawar Jordan, who's a lot smaller, really explosive, versatile. But Guerendo always stole the show for me because the dude is what, 5'11, 6 foot, 220, and he glides as a runner. He's so explosive, so he's got speed, he's very fluid, right? You mentioned it, wide zone. He's got the tracking speed to get outside those blocks and then just cut up field without losing too much speed. That flexibility and that speed at that size is very impressive to me. So I think all
Yeah.
of the foundation is there for a Shanahan scheme runner, like you said, to say, let's just get this guy in the room, get him under the scheme, and just let him unleash his tools with this blocking. Right? I love his potential. A few more guys that I really like. Ray Davis from Kentucky is one who really
Mhm.
showed out at the Senior Bowl. He might not even be a late round guy. I feel he feels like a guy once you reach round four, round five, someone's going to fall in love with him enough to take him. But he was very productive at Kentucky. I believe he transferred over from Vanderbilt. But he's very dense, again, energetic mover, really nice cutter, really efficient, energetic, explosive cutter. And I really like the plays that he made beyond his frame at the Senior Bowl, too, as a receiver. I think the versatility is there to be a really good community guy. A few others. Dylan Lobby from New Hampshire. I'm such a big fan of his, man. I love that. I love that profile. I mean, you can probably tell by now. Receiving versatility will win me over from running backs. If you have that versatility, that's a good thing to have. There's a lot of games watching New Hampshire where you kind of have to pause a little bit. Like a lot of running backs that you watch on tape. All right, he's in the backfield. I know that. With Dylan Lobby, it's like, wait, where'd he go? Oh, he's in the slot now, right? And
Yeah.
he's running
Yeah.
a breaker or a dig, right? It's like, oh my god, this guy is so versatile, and he had such high end receiving volume and production at the collegiate level, and we saw it at the Senior Bowl too. A lot of the little things for route running, like throttle control, pacing, kind of manipulating those stem angles, right? Very efficient plant and drive technique at stems and then catching ability. He's got all of that too as a runner as well. I think there's enough swivel flexibility to manipulate, press into blocks and, get upfield. I think the vision is pretty good too. So I would take him early to mid day three. I think he's got a really complete profile and really meshes with the modern receiving versatility that's kind of, coveted from these guys. And then one more, Blake Watson from Memphis. Back when it was me and Dalton, I think I said his name about 12, 20, 30 times or so. So I got to get him in here again. But Blake Watson is
Yeah.
around 5'9, 190, a little bit smaller, but we talk about patience from a few of these guys. I think he's one of the most patient runners in this class. He's so smooth, so disciplined, not pressing upfield too much, waiting till his blocks set up, but very, very calm and composed amidst chaos. And then he's a very good receiving threat, very fluid receiver, very good route runner. He's got a wide tree, and he's got pretty good contact balance for his size too. So I really like his profile for sure. But the bottom line is,
Yeah.
any running backs in this class, don't get disillusioned just because there's no round one or maybe even bona fide round two talent. There is a lot of value to be had in the middle and later rounds. Any closing thoughts on running backs before we shift over to linebacker?
Yeah, no, I love the Blake Watson, him and Michael Wiley
Yes.
out of Arizona and Georgia. I think are some of my favorite receiving end talent, like just like receiving backs. I think it's a great shout out.
Yeah, man, there's so much. Like I said, we could go.
Yeah, we could have we could have spent the whole 45 minutes
We
talking about
could,
this
man. It's just
class.
we got to, and that's the thing. Like we got to really control ourselves because it's so easy to just get on a tangent and be
We're
like,
just yapping,
it's just
man.
it
We're
just
just
happens, man. And then all of a sudden, it's like,
yeah.
oh, it's 10:45, and we haven't said a word about linebackers. So, but we're not going to do that today. We're going to maintain self control. I think. Let's get into the linebackers here because linebacker is kind of a similar position group. You talk about not any bona fide first round talent. There are guys who have some wild cards, be it medicals, right? Payton Wilson in particular, but there's a lot of depth, right? There's a lot of volume, a lot of numbers, right? And guys who, if they have the necessary athletic traits and if they win over teams enough with their processing ability and that kind of upside, right? Hey, we'll take them in round 3, round 4, something like that. So linebacker, it's a fun class. It's an interesting class, but I do think there is talent there. AJ, you've had a chance to scout some of these guys over the past week or two. I've scouted a few as well. What's your impression of this class and who are your top guys on the board?
There are a lot. I think this year more than ever, I've seen such a stark like schism of like this guy is a phenomenal run thumper. I do not want him in
Mhm.
coverage, and then this guy awesome in coverage. I do not want him in run defense. Like it are such a, and I think that's part of why it's such a divisive class because there's a lot of guys in both
Yeah,
sides.
but there's not a lot of both.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but it there's a lot of upside. I think this year, I think people might be surprised because we're seeing a lot of mocks where linebackers aren't going until until the third round. I wouldn't be surprised if teams are like, you know what, this guy is such a we have him like we think he can be such a clear cut above the rest. I don't want to wait and risk it. So I actually think you might see a couple of guys go in the second round. Um, like Junior Colson. I think he's probably going to be the first off the board at this rate. Cooper out of Texas A&M as well. But there's a lot of I think hidden talent in this linebacker class that I feel like kind of just goes under the radar because it's linebacker
Mhm.
and nobody. It's like we're seeing a lot of people value linebacker less and less, even though I think now more than ever it's starting to become just as
Yeah.
important as it used to be.
Yeah, it's one of those positions where I don't know, and this is just a recent example, but the 49ers, right? Dre Greenlaw was making such a big impact early on in that Super Bowl, and then he, unfortunately tore his Achilles running out on the field. And to me, I saw a visible void, right? A visible shift when he was off the field, right? It was a little bit easier to exploit that. So, you look at guys who can read plays with discipline, right? Aren't taking eye candy on misdirections, right? Staying disciplined, staying composed, processing well, flowing to the ball, and making those plays at the second level before plays break big. That is a valuable part of it, right? And then matching up with these tight ends and these big slots, right? If you have the versatility to do that, like a Fred Warner, that's very, very valuable as well.
Yeah,
And these guys have the athleticism to do it. It's just like, do they have the
yeah.
refinement? That's the question.
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that the two Super Bowl teams this year had arguably the two best linebacker rooms in the NFL.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, Leo Chenal was the fourth linebacker for the Chiefs in the Super
That's just
Bowl in
crazy.
terms of like of snaps, which is
Mhm.
crazy. Like it just speaks to the depth. I think, and then obviously Fred Warner was tremendous. Greenlaw was tremendous, but I think a lot of teams like if you don't have that guy in the middle, I think it's starting to get tougher and tougher with teams kind of going a little bit more shifting back to the run game and running a lot more
Yeah.
power. It's very obvious right now if you don't have a guy in the middle. Like we saw it with the Eagles as the season fell
Yeah.
apart. their linebacker room. They moved Nolan Smith out there because they didn't have anybody else. And so I think this class is going to be just with how much talented depth there is. This class is going to produce a lot of starters because teams there's such a lack of it right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. Junior Colson, you mentioned him. I believe you did a report on him, correct? Yeah.
Yes, yeah,
So would you take him as the first linebacker? What I've seen from
yeah,
him, very explosive athlete. I feel like the instincts, gap instincts, the vision can be a little bit hit and miss sometimes, and that's a little concerning to me. But the athleticism is not in short supply. And he's like 6'3, 247. So he's a big dude, wears it efficiently.
yeah,
Talk to me about what you saw from him because you actually wrote up a scouting report recently.
yeah. I was pleasantly surprised with Junior Colson because I was a big fan of Jalen Ford and Cooper of Texas A&M,
Mhm.
and and I was like, these two guys just I felt like were the two best out of everybody else. And then I saw Junior Colson move. It's like, okay, never
Mhm.
mind. This kid, like, you talked about the size and athleticism combo, but I was extremely impressed with his ability in zone. I thought he was a tremendously fluid mover when dropping, kept his eyes on the quarterback, quick instincts to close and shut down windows. The ability to hold up in man coverage at 245 plus pounds is not lost on me. I
Mhm.
think like that is quintessential Mike linebacker. And when you talk about the attitude that he plays with, he fought through so many injuries this year. He played with a cast on his hand towards the end of the year. But I think that mentality is going to endear him a lot
Mhm.
to a lot of teams. Um, I when I was talking to a scouting buddy of mine, he actually brought up that the profile was very reminiscent to Tremaine Edmonds coming out in 2018. Colson was just one of the three true junior linebackers to declare this year. So like he's obviously young, tremendous athletic profile with still some room to grow, but you've seen such an advanced floor. Like the nuance in zone coverage especially is so rare to see
Mhm.
out of a true junior linebacker like that. Like, yeah, I wanted to see him trigger downhill a little bit more. I think there were times where like a misdirection, he was just a little too slow to key. And but like when he sees it and like he's confident in that and he's going, I would like to see him use that size a little bit better when taking on blocks. But there are a fair amount of linebackers in the NFL that aren't necessarily great at taking on blocks, and it's not really hurt them. I just think when you look at his development arc, I mean, by the time his rookie contract is up, he'll be 25, and just how gifted he is already with that athletic profile, I would be hard pressed to not say like, yeah, this kid's the first off the board. I just think when you look at development arc and like how the game is moving, you want a guy, especially if you're going to play like the too high stuff that is becoming a lot of the rage to take away some of the explosive deep shots. You're going to try to play a little bit more light box, some of the 5-man fronts. You want a guy in the middle that has that elite
Mhm.
range that Colson possesses. You want a guy that can match up, can carry vertically in the middle of the field. I don't know if anybody in this class does it better than Colson.
That's very exciting. I need to watch him in depth now. I've watched a little bit. I have an impression, but you're really making me excited there because I the athletic tools they do pop for sure. So it's just about. It sounds like to me when things are a little more congested, maybe he's not quite as comfortable yet. But when he's in space, like working zones, that's when he really shines. That's when he gets comfortable. So that's
Yeah.
that's fun to hear. I like to hear that, especially because and you look at the defense that he's coming from too. Jesse Minter, that defensive coordinator, working in that Mike McDonald tree, where disguising coverages and rush looks, right? Being versatile as a
Hmm.
linebacker is becoming so much more valuable in the modern NFL. So, like you said, having a guy who can not only fulfill those roles but also mess with the defensive look pre-snap and kind of manipulate that offense into giving you a look that you want to see, so that you can
Yeah.
predict it a little bit better. It's that chess game, man, and having that queen on the chessboard, it's very fun. So Junior Colson, it sounds
Yeah.
like he could be that guy, which is very fun to hear.
Yeah, yeah. Also, just a tremendous backstory
Mhm.
as well. Like when I was doing the research for him, like he grew up in Haiti. He was adopted from Haiti after the earthquakes, which I like. Just an awesome. story, just the way that he fights, I think will endear himself to a lot of teams as
Yeah,
well.
and we see that too. Teams. It's not just the film part; it's the mental part, it's the
It's a
character, it's the
character. Yeah.
backstory. So it's all part of the puzzle. And it's gonna be fun to see where it brings him. Another guy. You talk about range. You talk about speed. Payton Wilson from NC State did his scouting report
Yeah.
this past week, and he's got it for sure. It's fun because he's 6'4". Usually with taller guys, you don't expect them to move that way, but he's a mosquito on the field. I mean, it's just crazy. Not just the speed in the long track range, but in close quarters too. I mean, one of the most fluid, energetic movers that I've seen. I think the swivel freedom with his hips is incredible. The ability to manipulate tackling angles and break down before making tackles is very impressive to me. At 6'4", I think he only had 31/8 inch arms, so actually below average length at 6'4", which is
Yeah.
pretty interesting. You don't see that very often, but that does show up at times, limiting his ability to deconstruct blocks. Sometimes linemen climbing to the second level can get inside his frame a little bit more. And, at 234 pounds, doesn't have great play strength too. So there are a few more questions I have with him in that light, but you want to talk about a guy who is instinctive, always around the ball, able to sift through congestion, has the range to close gaps with ease, pretty good in coverage too. I really like his blind spot awareness. He's very good at getting depth and then shifting his hips and feeling receivers kind of sneaking behind him and kind of clogging those lanes. So that instinct, that range, that explosiveness, that level of balance between physical talent and operational utility is very much there with Payton Wilson. It's just the questions that I have. The frame density, the play strength, the length, those things may cause some issues, block deconstruction and physicality application at the next level. And then the injury history, right? Tore his ACL
Yeah.
twice, once in his senior year of high school, and then again as a true freshman, I believe. And then 2021, 2 games in, suffered a season-ending shoulder injury too. So the injury history is pretty concerning. But then you look at his frame, which is pretty slight, pretty lean. I do have some durability questions. So right now, he is my top pure film grade at linebacker. And I haven't done a final grade on Junior Colson. There's still a few other guys that I need to work back to. But on the film, there's a lot to like. It's just the medicals, the projected durability.
Hmm.
Those things do scare me legitimately a little bit.
Yeah. I think if you put him as like a weak side linebacker, next to like an already established Mike, I think I would really like his film, like his landing spot if he ended up with like
Yeah.
Seattle, right next to Jordan Brooks, who's going to probably likely play Mike under Mike McDonald. How many times can we say Mike in
We're
in
going
a
for the record.
sentence? But yeah, but I think if you pair him with that guy and just let him go work, maybe not ask him to take on as many blocks, keep him free and kind of out in space and let him work that way. I think Peyton Wilson, just until you see how he adjusts to the NFL and works on his frame, like the medicals, I think are the biggest thing for him. Like you don't want another Brian Bosworth or a Leighton Vander Esch. As unfortunate as those situations are, teams are definitely scared of those at linebacker.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I think on film, like if it was just like a pure film, we'd be talking about Peyton Wilson in the top 50. I don't think with any doubts. Like just tremendous range. The athleticism is there. The ability to in zone and in man coverage. Like he does it all. It's just can he last a full season?
Mhm.
Can he prove in the NFL that he is durable and he's going to give you multiple years out of the position? Don't know. Like that's above our pay
Yeah,
grade.
exactly.
We don't have the medical
And that's
access.
tough because like you need that to have a full evaluation, the full scope of what's happening. And but hey, as NFL as media analysts, sometimes that's part of the equation is saying, hey, I don't have access to this. I don't know. So we'll have to see. The NFL
Yeah.
combine will be big for him. I'll just say that because at 6'4", right, you would expect size and durability to be a strength, but the dude is sub 240. Like he's pretty lean for his size. And with the injury history, it's not something that I'm just going to shrug off and say, yeah, it should be fine. I don't really know.
Yeah.
I think it's something that's going to be a
Yeah.
little bit more concerning. Some of these other guys in the early rounds, I really like Cedric Gray. I don't know where exactly he's going to fall on my final board, but I do like him a lot. I think we talked about,
Mhm.
Guys who are either athletic or a run stopper. I think of the top guys, he probably has one of the better balances of both. I really like how physical he is engaging downhill, using his proportional length to fight blocks, really good at splicing through gaps, working laterally. So I love that aspect of his game. In coverage, I think laterally there's still room for him to work, but I think he has shown that he can key in on the QB's eyes, kind of get depth and kind of hawk in front of those short passes. boxes. So there is some upside there. I think the balance is there for him. Very good. You mentioned Jalen Ford. I'm a fan of what he has to offer as well. Again, really explosive, really long, but pretty good in coverage too. You can see the instincts, getting depth again, making plays on the ball. That's a fun combination for him as well. Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is kind of an enigma right now. 2023 wasn't as free flowing laterally as he was in 2022. I actually gave him high marks for his lateral agility and twitch. Coming out of 2022, I thought the foot speed, the ability to recalibrate ahead of blocks was very good. This year, a little bit slower. You wondered if he was hampered by a little bit of an injury, but I do think the frame is really good. The frame density, the play strength. One thing that really stood out to me in 2022 in particular, but you did see a little bit of it in 2023 again, was using the combination of physicality and flexibility to fight through blocks, right? And gain space and freedom in the short areas and kind of clog running lanes that way. And then I think there was that pick six that he had, which showed that route recognition, explosiveness. The straight line burst is very good. It's just, are we going to get the same type of mobility, right? Or is it kind of something that's going to peter out? So a bit polarizing on that front. And then one more guy that I'll bring up is UTEP's Tyrese Knight. I was watching a little bit of him the past couple of days. I like him a lot, man. I think 6 foot 3/8, so around 6 foot, but at 234, 32.5-inch arms. And he's explosive. He's a very springy lateral athlete, and he's very good at using that and kind of, I think, keying in on blocking looks like polars and things like that, identifying run direction and scheme early on in reps and using that to guide himself to the proper positioning, the proper block. I think there's still things like block deconstruction and engagement with his length, and things like not flushing himself into the wrong gap and boxing himself off. Still a little bit hot and cold there, but I do really like the flashes of instinct and processing ability that are there with his physical tools and in coverage as well. I think the full field vision, the ability to get depth and kind of manage his zone, but also recognize crossers breaking up over the middle of the field and kind of triggering on that and making plays on the ball. He had 7 pass deflections, so pretty productive there. A lot of things to like with his film. And then Trevin Wallace, I almost forgot, but I'll let you talk about him because you did his report too, and he's a good physical talent as well. But the bottom line is kind of like the RB class, right? We're kind of seeing a similar theme here. There's not a ton of bona fide first round talent, but there is a lot of volume in the middle rounds. So that's a good thing to have.
Yeah. I think with with Jeremiah Trotter Jr. specifically, you touched on that physicality. I think teams that run a lot of like the sim pressures that are a little bit more of the meta, I think teams will love his ability to bring it as a blitzer. Just that physicality. Like I think he's a perfect Dallas Cowboy because they're gonna want to try to beef up the middle. Mike Zimmer is gonna send a ton of pressures, that those double mug looks that he is rather famous for. I think Trotter fits that perfectly. Like you talked about Tyrese Knight, I loved his ability in the short area. I think he's a great late round weak side linebacker as well. But Trevin Wallace is another guy that like top 100. You want to talk about, he's young. He's with Colson and Trotter as the only true juniors. High character, reportedly. Just everybody raved about his ability. He was a team captain. Does a lot of like off the field work as a leader, but the athleticism and the physicality that he plays with and his coverage chops, I think are just like they stand out. If you want to talk about a top 100 pick that is probably going to go a lot earlier than I think people expect it to be, like I think he's probably going to go around 75. Just in terms of like it like a draft pick range, I think it'd be closer to 75 than anything. I fell in love with his report. I just think when you look kind of like with Colson, the development arc of what he has already and the tools that he has just present such a high ceiling for him. I think teams are going to covet. I think he's going to go into the combine and test phenomenal. And I think teams are going to go, oh wait, hang on a sec, who's this kid out of Kentucky? Who's this? And I think the range that he plays with in his demeanor, competitive toughness, all of it stands out to me. Just tremendous gifts.
Yeah, he's 6'1", I think 235, 240, and 33-inch arms. So again, really good frame density, proportional length. What stood out to me when I watched a little bit of him is that he's like an apex predator in the box, man. I mean, that closing speed is elite. It is instant. And then he's got the length to wrap guys up, right? That playmaking range that comes with that combination of speed and length is very impressive. But then you mentioned it, the coverage chops are there too. I think the Senior Bowl kind of put that in the spotlight when he's covering RB wheel routes 40 yards down the field, not missing a step, really managing his hip leverage really well. So I think, like you said, the physical combination, the complete profile is there to maybe fuel a rise. It kind of feels like Jamin Davis a couple cycles ago, a guy who come into the offseason didn't have a ton of buzz, but after the NFL Combine and teams are getting affiliated with him more, rose up the board and skyrocketed. So Trevin Wallace, Junior Colson, a few of those guys to watch in the LB class. Real quick, AJ, we got 20 seconds. A couple more late round guys that you like.
Muma and Jung Meta
John
out of
Meta, yes sir,
Wisconsin
yes sir.
is so fun. Just a freaky ball of energy. And then Easton Gibbs, linebacker out of Wyoming. Like I loved his film. He does everything well. He showed it at the Shrine Bowl. I hope he just meets like the minimum testing at the combine. But I love both of those guys. I think are day 3 sleepers in this class.
Nice. And then I'll add a couple more. Aaron Casey from Indiana. I think he had like 22 tackles for loss. Love his ability to work downhill. And then Darius Muazal from UCLA. I think versatile, really hard charging, explosive. I think he'll be a good late round get. But that's all we got. We're out of time for the RB and LB preview. We'll be back with more combine content next week. We'll be at the combine in a couple of weeks to give you more content there. But in the meantime, thank you all for tuning in. We'll have another episode of the PFN Scouting Podcast coming up. That's all. Appreciate you all. See you next time.